Could you still do the show if you didn't have a passion for wrestling?
Hey, friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
And you're watching Tom Talks Rubbish.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rubbish, and stand back for another interview. This time, I'm joined by Jason Solomonster from the Solomonster Sound Off. So welcome to the show, Jason.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So if we take this back, before your work podcasting and stuff like that, where does Jason first discover wrestling?
Jason first discovers wrestling in 1987 through my father and grandfather. They were fans of it. They were at the first WrestleMania together in 85.
Oh, wow.
So from that came my fandom, and that it just sort of ballooned from there.
So if we break down what brought you as a fan, what was it in 1987 that you were like, I really like this, I'm going to stick with this?
Oh, it was just the larger than life characters. It was the era of Hulkamania. You had the Macho Man, you had Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and all of these different, big names from back then. Jake the Snake coming to the ring with the snake and putting the snake on his opponents. And it captured me, I guess, as it did a lot of my friends back then. And a lot of them stayed fans for a few years, and then they slowly fell off. And I was one of the few who stuck with it and just kept going. But that's what really drew me into it in the first place.
I'm always curious to know this from people, but if you discovered it, say the age you are now, you discovered that same type of wrestling, do you think you would be as invested, or do you think your childlike innocence maybe helped that sort of larger than life? I hope that question made sense.
Yeah, no, I think it would be different because, and that goes for, I think, everybody in a way. Even if you were a young kid or a teenager coming up in the Monday Night War period, when you're younger, it's just different. You are not going to react to the same things when you're in your 30s or your 40s as you would when you're 4 or when you're 14. So I think it would have been different. Could it have held me in the same way? I probably would be a fan. I would tune in. I don't know if it would hold me in the same way, though. Wrestling itself is just different now than it was back then.
What if I was to flip the question and say to you, if you were to discover today's wrestling at 4 years old, do you think you would have been as big a fan?
I think I would have been a fan. I don't know that I would have stayed as big of a fan as I was, because it's just a very different. I mean, if we're talking mainly WWE, especially here, it's just very different than it was then. So no, I think I would have been a fan. I wouldn't have had that frame of reference to compare it to something and say, oh, it's not as good as this. I think there's certain characters that I would have been a fan of. Would I have been as invested and as hardcore of a fan? That is hard to say.
Fair enough. So have you had a drop-off period where you're like, I'm going to cut wrestling out of my life for a little while?
I never cut it out. There was a drop-off in the mid-90s, around 95, where it just got a little boring for me. And that was the period of time where they were kind of running amok with all these different gimmicks, and it was getting a little too Looney Tunes. So I almost, I almost fell out of it around that time. But I stuck with it. And then obviously it's a good thing I stuck with it, because the following year is when things really began to take off and get really interesting with the competition between the two companies. But outside of that, there have been a lot of really bad shows that WWE has put on, and other promotions as well. But because of the nature of what I'm doing now with the show, no, I haven't fallen out of it or given up on it. I feel like I kind of can't now. I'm kind of committed to it, given what I do. So outside of that one period in 95 now.
So you brought up there your brilliant podcast and YouTube channel, the Solomonster Standoff. So when did that first come about?
That first came about in 2007. Very end of 2007, I did the very first episode. This past Sunday, as we are talking now, I recorded the 755th episode.
Wow.
Of that main show.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's pretty crazy to think about. Of course, I've done a lot of other shows. The YouTube channel that I do also has a lot of separate content and reviews. So I can't even quantify how many actual shows I've done over the last 15 years. It's been a lot more than 755. But that main show that I do, once a week, it's not live. I record it, it drops. That hasn't changed. I've been doing that pretty much since day one. And I have a lot of people who have stuck with me and listen and say, hey, I've been listening since episode 1. And it blows me away.
That's really cool to hear.
Yeah.
Like, did you think you would get to 750 episodes, or was there ever a point that you were like, maybe this has run its course? I hope that's the right phrase.
No. I never had any number in my head. I never had any expectations in my head. I'm just going to do this for a year. I'm just going to do this for a while. I didn't have any expectations. I just did it because it was something, it was an outlet for me to express my opinions, and I had a platform to do that. And as it got bigger and as the audience sort of grew, I just thought, okay, how big can we grow this? Mm-hmm. I never thought, well, boy, I was going to finish in 2014. That was going to be it. No, it was never anything like that. And I never imagined that it would still be going today. Never thought so.
Do you think, and I apologize for interrupting you there,
mm-hmm.
That because you, based on the Chris Van Vliet interview that I did watch for research, you talked a lot about the fact that this was just a side hustle and you had a day job at that time, which I assume, do you still have that same day job?
I do.
Okay. So because this is a side hustle and almost what I would call a passion project, do you think that that led you to have maybe less expectations on, okay, this has got to grow for my livelihood almost? I hope that made sense.
I think it was more just a matter of trying to find the time to do it at a time when I had a lot of other things going on and clients and projects and things of that nature. There were a lot of weeks, honestly, if I look back now at the weeks that I kind of missed in those early years, I was a little more lackadaisical with it, where a week or two would go by sometimes, and then I would do the next episode. And sometimes I'd say, I don't know if there's going to be a show next week, guys. And then 2 weeks later, I'd come back. Now, I can't even fathom the idea of doing that now. I'm probably one of the most consistent people out there. I just don't miss shows. So if you factor in the weeks that I missed, we'd probably be up to like 900 plus by now. To me, it was just a matter of finding the time to do it, put the time and effort in to watch the shows, put whatever notes together, and just, at the time it wasn't the camera, it was just speaking to the mic. Maybe that had something to do with it, the low expectations for it and just having fun with it and just playing it kind of fast and loose. And maybe that had a little something to do with it, but no, I mean, it was just, okay, we know that this Sunday there's going to be a show, so let's do the work and record the show, and then it's just on to the next.
You talked about there something that I find really interesting, that when you first started, you would not be okay with missing a week or so, but like you would maybe miss a few weeks. So where did that switch happen that you were like, okay, this is my routine, this is when I record the show to go out on Sunday?
It was probably about 2 or 3 years in, where it really started to build up to a point where people would be upset if there was no show. They would say, oh, I thought there was going to be a show. I build my whole Sunday routine. I go for a jog, or I'm doing laundry, or whatever it might be. And people really were upset when I would miss shows. And I also realized that when you're not doing a show and you're not as consistent as you should be, you're also potentially losing audience and you're not picking up new listeners. Consistency is very important. And so I think it was about probably a couple of years in when I said, okay, we need to make sure this is a consistent weekly thing. And unless I'm sick and dying or something, it's important to get content out no matter what.
What is like your routine for recording content? Is it like you, for specifically the podcast, is it sort of you have a specific day where you record it? Like, is it that sort of thing?
Yeah. Yeah. The day that I record it is the day that it drops. So every Sunday, Sunday morning is when I typically record. I don't do it piecemeal where I do a few segments and then I piece it together. Unless I would be going away to an event, there would be a WrestleMania, let's say, that I was going to be going to. And, maybe I knew I wasn't going to be home or I wasn't going to be able to do a proper show that Sunday. So I would record a segment or two. That was very rare. I don't like doing that. I like just sitting down and going and doing the whole thing at once. So that's the process as far as recording is concerned. And I do, the prep, the recording, the editing, and, pushing it out and promoting it on social media, as I think most people do who have a show. I mean, maybe they have other people helping them, but
I do everything myself.
And I don't know about you, but like, I like that. I prefer that. I don't like relying on other people when it comes to stuff like that. I have certain people who will help me. I have a good friend of mine, Noah, who I've been friends with for a number of years, and he's done tremendous work for me in terms of helping on intros and outros for the show, and he's very talented with that. I have another person, Steve, who does all the artwork that you see on my YouTube channel. I mean, he is fantastic with it. He helps bring the channel to life. When it comes to the show itself, there's a reason I don't have a co-host. I don't like relying on other people. I want to just rely on myself. If I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail because I screwed up or I didn't do something the way it should have been done.
You don't want almost that scapegoat of, okay, this other person wasn't here, so that's
and I've seen that happen with other shows over the years as well, who have you co-hosts or guests or whatever. And look, I've done the occasional shows with friends of mine who I'll bring in as co-hosts, and I've interviewed a whole bunch of people. It's not really an interview podcast, but I've interviewed a ton of people over the years, and that's fine. But in terms of the day-to-day, week-to-week, I just like having control. I guess I'm a control freak, and I want to have control over the whole thing. So I know exactly what has to be done, how much work is left to do. There's breaking news. All right, here's what we got to do. I'm very sort of regimented like that. And that's always how I've done the show.
What is one part that you currently have to do that you're like, if someone could take this off my hands, I would be so happy?
Watch some of the shows.
Fair enough.
If I can get somebody else to watch Monday Night Raw for me, that would be fantastic. It's 3 hours every week that I wouldn't have to worry about. No, I mean, outside of that, if you ever listen to the main show that I do, I never really intended for it to be a review show. And it is partially a review show because, I'm talking about Raw and I'm talking about some of the other shows, even though I might do a standalone review for Dynamite or for SmackDown. I really always envisioned it, and what it was, and I kind of got away from it for a while, it is really a commentary on the news of the week and my opinions and my analysis. And that's really where the show started to take off all those years ago. I would be very opinionated on certain things. And yeah, I would talk about Impact and Raw and the TV shows and try to fit as much of that into one episode. I wasn't doing separate reviews, but it was really the top stories, or I'm ranting on this or whatever. That's what got people really interested in the show. So that pretty much is still the blueprint for it. The show hasn't really changed all that much over the years. I come up with fun new concepts for segments when I can, but the formula works. People like what they hear.
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, they like what they hear, and as long as they're happy and they stick with it, then I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing.
Fair enough. So then what is, and I assume you're going to list off a reel of shows you have to watch, but what is like your consumption of wrestling right now for what you would call your second job, which is the podcast?
I mean, in a typical week, I watch all the key shows that most people probably do, right? So I watch Raw, I watch SmackDown, I watch NXT, I watch Dynamite, I watch Rampage, and that's kind of the core. Mm-hmm. I will try when I can, if there's a really good MLW show, or if there's a really good, when Ring of Honor was still on, if there was a really good Ring of Honor main event or something, I would try to fit that in. Impact, I don't watch as much as I used to, not nearly as much as I used to. I used to be a big Lucha Underground fan. For the NWA for a while. I was watching the NWA. But those core shows really are the main things. And then in addition to the shows, there's so many other things to talk about. So it's not just what shows do I watch. It's okay, there's all this other news going on, or people who are tweeting and saying stupid stuff, and people want to know what I think about it. So then you have to just combine. You have your news, and then you have your sort of reviews of the shows. I do a mailbag segment, so I'm constantly going through email questions. I can't even keep up with all the emails I get. So that's part of it too. And I don't just, it's not like I just sit down and put together 5 bullet points and there's the show, right? There's a medium where you're not scripting everything out like this is WWE, but you need to have things down because there's so much going on. There's no way I'm going to sit in front of a mic on a Sunday and remember every single thing that happened and remember every single quote from something someone said. You've got to put together your notes. You've got to put it together in the order that makes sense, and then save questions for the end. And it's a process. I have my routine. It works for me. It might not work for everybody else.
Fair enough. So for people that have a podcast that maybe they skip a week, like you did in the beginning, is there something you have to do to stay motivated to record on days that you don't feel like recording? And then basically, what do you do to motivate yourself on days that you're like, I really can't be asked to do this today?
I think I just say to myself, look, I have an audience for this that are waiting for this show. I have sponsors of my own. And so nearly every week there's some sort of sponsor that I'm working with, and I have to, talk about that. And I don't have the option, even if I wanted to, of saying, you know what, I'm not going to do a show this week, because then they're not going to be a sponsor for very long.
Fair enough.
So I have responsibilities now that I wouldn't have had 5, 10, 12 years ago when the show was still in its infancy. That plays a role in it as well. And we can call it a side gig and a side hustle. The reality is, though, and it's one of the things I'm most proud of, I have turned this. It is a passion of mine. But
I apologize for calling it a side.
No. But I think that's how most people would look at it, and that's kind of how I looked at it. But it's gotten to the point, it's been successful enough where, I can support myself just by doing that. But the only way to do that is to put content out. I always say content is king. If the content isn't there, then the eyeballs aren't there. You're not going to make money off of it, like whatever your motivation is. So as much as it's a passion, it's a business for me. And I can't just wake up one morning and say, I don't feel like doing it. If you wake up and you're sick or there's a family event or something, that's understandable. But I'm talking week to week, day to day. Yeah, there are weeks where I'm like, oh God, this is going to be 2 hours now. Nothing really happened this week. It was kind of, let's say, a dull week. But you do it because that's your job and that's what people expect you to do.
Is there some sort of is there an enjoyment factor in there as well? Like, I get to talk about this now. Say, I'm trying to think of something that happened at the time of recording that you're like, I can't wait to talk. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. I get excited sometimes when there's something really juicy that I can't wait to talk about, or something funny I can't wait to talk about. Like I said at the beginning, I started this in part as a creative outlet for myself. I had all these thoughts and opinions and no place to put them. And so the show was my creative outlet. And it still is 15 years later. It's my main outlet. I have Twitter now and all these other, YouTube. But I will get excited sometimes when there's a really good show that has a lot of good stuff to talk about. I mean, I've done shows before, again, solo hosted. It's just me. And I'll go 2.5 hours. I'll go 3 hours. I try not to do that as much now. I try to keep them to 2 hours as much as I can. But for a while there, the shows were averaging 2.5 to 3 hours a week. And it's just one voice. It's one person. When I have really good stuff to talk about, I get excited and it's fun for me.
Fair enough. So as someone that has been quite public about they weren't too comfortable being on camera, first of all, what is your routine when you know you're going to be on camera? how do you sort of like either psych yourself up or calm yourself down to be on camera?
Oh, like Goldberg, I smack myself around before I go live on the air, and I snort and I spit. No,
If that works.
Hey, whatever works, right? As long as you don't headbutt a door and bust yourself open like Goldberg does.
Obviously.
My routine, in terms of getting psyched up or whatever, it's not anything really exciting. I go live every week, and to me now it's just commonplace. I'll be live tonight, in fact, for something. And so, you get everything hooked up. You got to make sure everything is working. The worst thing and it happens to everybody, and Lord knows it happened to me plenty of times, technical problems. I can't stand when there's some kind of a technical malfunction. Even
internet is never normally my friend.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's not my fault, if it's out of my hands, the internet goes down, or it's a computer issue. Especially on my older laptop, I had plenty of problems like that. I'd be streaming and then it would freeze, and then I'd have to quickly reboot and start over again. And I can't stand that because I'm a perfectionist. I hate when stuff like that happens. So I'll make sure this is working, test 1, 2, 3, make sure the audio sounds good, the video looks good, position the way it should be positioned. And then when I play music, usually at the beginning of the stream, just to give people a chance to file in, I'm kind of getting excited. I'm getting into it now. I'm clearing my throat. I'm making sure, all right, here we go. And then boom, then you go. The camera goes on and I go and I just do my thing.
Do you have to do anything to calm down after a stream? Because I know for me personally, after a really great interview, I have to do something to calm down because I'm so jazzed about what a good interview it's been and stuff like that. Do you have to do anything like that?
Not usually, because when I go live, I'm usually ending very late. So I'm not going off the air until after midnight, 1 a.m., sometimes 2 a.m. if it's a really long stream. By then, I'm just exhausted. So I'm not like, excited to the point where, oh man, I can't sleep, I need to come down. It's like, it's 1:30 in the morning, I got to get my ass to bed. So I don't usually have that issue just because I'm not doing midday streaming, early in the day streaming. It's usually really late and I'm just ready to clock out for the night.
Fair enough. So as someone that's been doing podcasting since 2007, how have you, first of all, seen your podcast change? And then how have you seen the overall industry change?
A lot more people are doing them now. Back when I started it, you had some fan hosted shows. You didn't really have hardly any wrestler hosted shows. That didn't come until many years later. And now I feel like every wrestler has a podcast now. And that's fine because it's like me, Brad. I had an opinion. I wanted to start a show, and everybody else has the right to do that also. It's just it's a very crowded field now. And I think a lot of voices get drowned out because there are so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that probably is the biggest change. When I was doing mine, I was one of a handful, very few, who were really doing it consistently, even on the fan side. And as far as how the podcast itself has changed, the basic formula, the basic structure of the show hasn't changed that much. But if you go back and listen to those earlier shows and compare it to now, the biggest thing that's changed probably is me in terms of how I sound. I was very timid early on. You could hear how nervous I was when I would do it. And I was a little unsure of myself. I hadn't really found my voice yet. I don't mean necessarily the literal voice, just how do I want to sound? When I'm on this show, how sure of you want to sound confident. You want to sound like you know what you're talking about and relaxed. You don't want to sound tense. And I almost can't even stand to go back and listen to myself in the early days because it's just the change is night and day. So that would be the other major change I would say.
What was the question? So, and this is going to sound like a very silly question, but if you woke up one day and was like, something's happened in wrestling, I need to put wrestling away for a while. And I know you've got sponsors to factor in, but could you still do the show if you didn't have a passion for wrestling? If I doing the show, if I didn't have a passion for it, or just for whatever reason, there were no shows to watch? No. So say like you woke up tomorrow and was like, I hate wrestling for whatever reason.
Okay.
Could you still do the show?
Yeah, I could still do it. But I think people would be able to see through it. They would hear it in my voice or see it on my face that I'm not happy. And what happens at that point is your audience begins to fall off, because if people realize that you just hate everything. I mean, believe me, there's things I hate, but I don't hate wrestling. If they realize I just didn't like anything about it, I can't stand it, I don't want to be talking about it, I'm miserable, that's going to come through. And, no one wants to listen to that every week. So I would hope that doesn't happen. I can't say for sure that it won't, but I could tell you that I've been watching wrestling for virtually my entire life. And unless something catastrophic were to happen, I don't think I can envision a day where I'm not watching it. So I don't think that's going to be an issue. I hope that never happens.
Fair enough. That's just something I was always really curious to know. What about, do you see the show coming to an end at any point?
Not anytime soon. No, I don't think. I don't know if the platforms or access to it might change. If somehow it gets to a level where it gets even bigger, that would be fantastic. I don't know what that would look like. But in terms of just ending it and stopping, I can't say that I have any plans for that anytime soon. No.
Something else that I'm curious to know is you talked about there being, in your own words, a bit of a control freak at times. But if you got on a major podcast network, like Westwood One, for example, like I think that's a podcast network. Like I'm not very good at.
Well, Westwood One, I think it's more it's a series of radio shows and stations, I think, that they own.
Basically, if you got on a network for your podcast, but they were like, you have to do this a specific way, blah 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 blah. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, if they tried to pick your show apart and was like, this is the way you've got to do it, would you be able to do the show? Or do you think if it wasn't your authentic voice, it might not?
I don't think I would. Yeah, I don't think I would want to do that. I mean, if there was ever a point that came, and again, I don't know what that would look like or who that would be with, if it was still technically a podcast, or if it jumped to radio or something, that would be a conversation I would have to have with those people in advance. I would need a very clear picture of, okay, how do you see this? What do you see my role in here? What are the things I'm allowed to do? What are the things I'm not allowed to do? Like, all of that would have to be known and spelled out in advance, because you have to expect that in a situation like that, if you're going to be working for someone else, they're going to have a say in what you do, because I mean, that's just how it works. And I understand that. And I can certainly coexist with other people and work within their system if I had to. But to give up a lot of control of what I do, or to be told you can't do this and this and that, like in my mind, like I don't need that. I don't want that. I don't need that. I can just keep doing what I'm doing and have full autonomy and not have to answer to anybody. And that's the thing I love about how independent the show is. It's not just relying on a co-host or guests or anything. It's just being able to do what I want in the way that I want to do it. I do it this way for a reason. I do it this way because it works, and I do it because I enjoy it. Yeah. And what I wouldn't want something to happen is where we're in a situation where somebody is coming in and saying, oh, well, this is how you're going to do it from now on. There's a certain freedom to being able to work for yourself and do whatever you want. Could I make that work? Yeah, I could, but it would have to be a situation where I'm still happy and I don't feel like, wait a minute, I'm being stifled in some way.
Fair enough. So as we look at wrapping this up, because I do want to be respectful of your time.
Sure.
And also the Zoom is about to crap out because, as I said, I'm not premium.
Well, who among us is premium?
Fair enough.
We take advantage of the free trial. That's what we do.
Exactly. So we're going to go into a quick segment that I call generic questions. This is, as the people that have seen my videos before will know, this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, their favorite pay-per-view, their favorite tag team, their favorite theme song, and their favorite overall show in wrestling. And basically, these are the questions that I'm sure Jason gets asked on Twitter a lot. And now he'll have a place to be like, look, I've answered this. Go watch this, which might mean more views for me. So everybody's happy. So what's your favorite wrestling match of all time, Jason?
My favorite match of all time, I would probably go with the Royal Rumble in 1992 because I've probably watched that single match more than any other single match. If I had to pick a singles match, I probably would go with, you know what? Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker from WrestleMania 25 is my favorite WrestleMania match. It just edges out Bret Hart and Steve Austin from WrestleMania 13. So take your pick from the ones I just mentioned.
Favorite pay-per-view of all time?
King of the Ring, 1993.
Favorite wrestler or superstar of all time?
Bret the Hitman Hart.
Favorite theme song of all time? Like entrance theme, I mean.
Real American.
Okay. Favorite what's it called? Favorite tag team of all time. My brain went blank then.
Demolition.
And finally, the show you would watch if you weren't in the wrestling media.
Current TV show?
No. Current wrestling show you would watch if you weren't in the wrestling media.
Right. Okay. Current wrestling show. AEW Dynamite.
Fair enough. So as we wrap this up, the question I end all my videos on, Jason, is with YouTube, with podcasting, with social media in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of way. So what is one video or podcast that you're like, don't go back and watch that. I've grown a lot since then, or maybe your opinions have changed, etc. And then what is one that you're like, if you want to know my body of work, make sure you guys check that one out.
You know, I can't really say that there is, at least not in terms of one that I would tell people absolutely do not go back and watch. There are early audio shows, the podcast that I've done that I probably would be like, maybe stay away from those. But I would say if you look at the quality just on your screen, video quality, when I first started doing the weekly consistent video stuff, and I jumped into video very late. It was really only about 3 or 4 years ago.
The end of 2020, wasn't it?
Well, no, I think it was the beginning, closer to the beginning or middle part of 2020. After the pandemic really started is when I was doing the video stuff consistently every week. I actually recently just went back and watched one of them, and I would say stay away from that because nobody was going anywhere. My hair was just ridiculous. I hadn't gotten a haircut in like 15 weeks. I looked completely ridiculous. Didn't sound and look quality wise as good as the streams do now. So I guess I would just say avoid those and focus more on the newer stuff. And in terms of the work that I'm most proud of, I mean, there have been shows that I have done over the years where when they're over, I'm like, man, that was a really good show. But the one that I always tell people is my favorite is I did episode 495 of my show was in May of 2017, I believe. And because my show is on Sunday every week, every year here in this country, I don't know if it's different where you are. Yeah, is Mother's Day. And so that particular Mother's Day, I had my mother on the show, almost like interviewed her. It was more of a conversation, but I kind of interviewed her. People had known about her because I had talked about her health issues on the air, and people were always saying nice things. So I thought it would be a fun thing tied into Mother's Day to have her on. And we probably talked for about 25 or 30 minutes and about me growing up as a wrestling fan. And then I did trivia with her. And I'm really glad I did that show because she passed away less than a year later.
I'm so sorry.
Every year, in fact, we just had the Mother's Day episode this past Sunday. I will always open the show with a sound. I had her do like a bumper for the show.
Yeah.
And I get to play that every year, and I'll go back and listen to the show, every now and then. So I don't know why it took me so long to figure out, hey, you do your show on Mother's Day every year. You should probably have her on earlier, but at least I had her on that one time. And people tell me like they think it's the best episode I ever did. So I'd probably go with that one.
That got me choked up. I'm not gonna lie. That's really sweet. So as we wrap this up, where can the good people find you?
On social media, you can find me on Twitter at Solomonster and on Instagram at the Solomonster. And the website is thesolomonster.com. So that is where you will find all of the most recent audio episodes. They're all archived there for you to go back and stream and listen to. And on YouTube, if you just type in the full name of the podcast, Solomonster Sounds Off, first thing that comes up should be the official channel. And there's weekly live streams and pay-per-view reviews and gaming, videos and all kinds of content on the YouTube channel every week.
It's well worth doing, guys. So if you guys like this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Rubbish. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talks Rubbish. Follow bodyslam.net and the WrestleWatch podcast for my show with Cassidy Haynes. And follow TTR Clips for clips from my interviews. And I will see you in the next one. Bye. Bye.